Who falls asleep on a stranger's shoulder and wakes up to a life they never imagined? Gina Reyes boarded the 5:40 a.m. train that morning just to make it to work on time. She had no idea that a missed stop, a tired heart, and one unexpected kindness would change everything. What began as a desperate commute turned into a journey neither of them could forget. Before we dive into the story, comment below where you're watching from. Enjoy the story, everyone. The 5:40 a.m. train pulled out of Springfield with a groan of steel and the low hum of tired travelers. The countryside outside the window was cloaked in pre-dawn gray, fields and trees blurred beneath a sky heavy with clouds. Gina Reyes sat near the middle of the car, her thin shoulders drawn in as if trying to shrink away from the chill that crept through her worn teal coat. Her breath misted the cold glass. She rubbed at it absently with a sleeve, trying to keep her eyes open. The strap of her old leather bag dug into her shoulder. Inside were the few things she'd grabbed before racing to the station: a dented thermos of lukewarm tea, a crumpled napkin wrapped around an apple hand pie she'd baked the night before, a dog-eared book of poetry, and the battered notebook where she jotted down her scattered verses and endless lists: rent due, loan payment, groceries to stretch through the week. Her body ached with fatigue. She'd finished a cleaning shift in an office building just after midnight and barely had time to rinse off and change before catching the early train. Kingsport wasn't far, but today the distance felt impossible. She tried to focus on the rhythm of the tracks, but the soft sway of the car made her eyelids heavier with every mile. Across the aisle, Nate Brooks watched her with quiet curiosity. The 33-year-old owner of Brookhaven Press, a once small-town publisher turned national chain of beloved bookshops, was dressed plainly: dark jeans, a navy sweater, sturdy boots still dusted from his walk through his property the day before. A man tired of attention, Nate had chosen this train, this early hour, to avoid it. He hadn't expected to notice anyone. And yet, something about the young woman in the teal coat drew him in. She wasn't polished or posed like the people he usually met at charity events or business dinners. She was real, tired in a way he recognized from long before his name meant anything. He saw the way she clutched her bag, the way she blinked fiercely against the weight of sleep, as if losing that fight would cost her more than just a missed stop. A few rows ahead, an elderly man sat with a golden Labrador resting faithfully at his feet. The dog Buddy, Nate overheard the man murmur during boarding, watched the world outside with calm brown eyes, tail occasionally thudding the floor in a lazy beat. Gina's head finally tipped, her hair falling across her face. She blinked, tried to straighten, and then the pull of exhaustion won. Her head gently came to rest against Nate's shoulder. For a long breath, he didn't move. The warmth of her, the soft scent of tea and apple, the utter trust in that small unconscious gesture, it disarmed him. Instead of shifting away, Nate adjusted his position, careful not to disturb her, and let her sleep. Buddy lifted his head, ears pricking up, watching the pair with quiet approval. His owner, Walter, glanced back, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. The train sped on. The fields gave way to wooded stretches and sleepy towns still wrapped in night. Nate tried to focus on the notebook in his lap, a list of appointments, ideas for new projects, but the weight of her against him, the soft rise and fall of her breath, kept drawing his gaze. Time blurred. The train didn't stop in Kingsport. Gina didn't stir. The world beyond the window brightened from gray to pale gold, the first light of morning catching on frost-laced branches. Next stop, Wyndham. Wyndham next. Nate blinked. They'd passed Kingsport long ago. Wyndham was the small town nearest his estate, a place so quiet it didn't even appear on some schedules. He could wake her. Or. He moved slowly, deliberately, sliding his arm around her shoulders and beneath her knees. She barely stirred, too deep in sleep to protest as he lifted her, cradling her light weight against his chest. Her bag hung from his other arm. On the platform at Wyndham, his truck waited. And so did Tom, his manager, eyebrows raised as Nate approached. "Sir?" She missed her stop, Nate said simply. "I'll make sure she's all right." Tom nodded, opening the door. Nate settled her into the passenger seat with care, adjusting her coat around her, tucking her bag at her feet. Buddy and Walter stepped off the train behind them. The dog padded over, sniffing Gina's boots, then sat by the truck door as if to guard her. Walter gave Nate a look, part question, part understanding, and tipped his cap. Nate nodded back. As they pulled away, the early sun broke through the clouds, casting the fields in soft gold. Nate glanced at Gina, still asleep, and wondered how a stranger on a train could already feel like the most important decision he'd made in years. The road from the station to Nate's estate wound through quiet fields and clusters of ancient oaks. The frost on the grass sparkled in the pale morning light. Nate kept one hand steady on the wheel, the other resting loosely against the curve of the steering wheel, stealing glances at the girl sleeping beside him. Gina's head lolled gently against the window now, her breath leaving faint circles of fog on the glass. Her features, softened in sleep, revealed more than she probably ever allowed while awake, the weariness carved into the corners of her mouth, the quiet strength in the set of her jaw, the delicate scar just above one brow that caught the light. Her coat had slipped open at the collar, revealing a faded shirt with a small embroidered flower near the hem, a touch of someone who once cared for details, or maybe still did. The truck turned onto the long drive leading to the main house. The Brooks estate had once been a grand thing, a stately manor surrounded by orchards and fields that had fed generations. Now it was quieter, simpler. Nate had let the grandeur fade in favor of practical beauty, fruit trees, vegetable gardens, a modest stable, and a house that felt lived in rather than displayed. Tom was already there when they pulled up, having taken a shortcut across the back road. He waited as Nate rounded the truck to lift Gina from the seat, her bag slung over his shoulder. "You sure about this, sir?" Tom asked, lowering his voice. Nate nodded. She missed her stop. It didn't feel right leaving her to fend for herself in Wyndham. Tom said nothing more, just opened the door. Inside, the house was warm from the fire that had been lit early by the housekeeper. Nate carried Gina to the wide couch in the sunroom, the one that overlooked the orchards, where the light streamed in soft and gold through tall windows. He laid her down gently, pulling a throw blanket over her, hesitating for a moment to brush a loose strand of hair from her cheek. Buddy, who jumped down from Walter's truck and followed them as naturally as if he belonged there, trotted in, sniffed at Gina's boots again, and lay down at the foot of the couch with a contented sigh. Nate sank into a chair across from her, finally letting out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The stillness of the room settled around him, but his thoughts raced. What would she think when she woke? Would she be afraid? Angry? For a long while, he just watched her sleep, watched Buddy's ears twitch in his dreams, watched the light move across the floor as morning turned slowly to afternoon. When at last she stirred, it was subtle, a twitch of her fingers, a furrow between her brows, the faintest hitch in her breath as wakefulness crept back in. Her eyes fluttered open, confused, adjusting to the unfamiliar room, the warmth, the quiet. Then she saw him. She bolted upright, the blanket falling to the floor. Where, what? Her voice cracked with the panic of not knowing. Nate raised both hands, palms out, voice low and steady. You're safe. You missed your stop. I didn't want to leave you stranded. This is my home, just outside Wyndham. I can drive you wherever you need to go. Her heart raced so loudly she could hear it in her ears. She looked at him, at the stranger she'd fallen asleep on, at the man who now stood across the room as if afraid to scare her further. I should go, she said quickly, already reaching for her bag. Buddy whined softly, lifting his head, watching her with those big brown eyes that seemed to plead for calm. You don't have to rush off, Nate said gently. There's tea. Food, if you're hungry. She hesitated, the weight of exhaustion crashing back down on her. Her legs felt like jelly. She hated that she was tempted, hated how kind he seemed, because kindness was dangerous when you didn't know if it was real. I just need a ride to Kingsport, she said finally, voice tight. Nate nodded. Of course. But he didn't move right away. He glanced at Buddy, then back at her. Maybe after you've had something to eat? Please. For the dog's sake, if not mine, he's already adopted you. Buddy thumped his tail, as if in agreement. Against her better judgment, Gina sank back onto the couch, rubbing her hands over her face. The room smelled faintly of wood smoke and apples. It was warm, too warm after the cold of the train and the outside world. Nate disappeared briefly and returned with a tray, tea, bread still warm from the oven, and a small jar of honey. He set it on the low table without a word, then moved back to give her space. Why did you do this? She asked after a long moment, her voice quieter now. He met her gaze steadily. Because you looked like no one else would. The simple truth of it hit harder than she expected. She stared down at her hands, at the little lines of callus from cleaning, from writing, from holding on too tight to too many things. Buddy edged closer, resting his head on her knee. The warmth of him, the trust in that small gesture, undid the last of her resistance. She picked up the tea, hands trembling slightly, and took a sip. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Gina let herself believe, just a little, that maybe not everyone wanted something in return. The tea's warmth spread through Gina's hands, the simple sweetness of honey softening the sharp edge of her hunger. She ate slowly, cautiously at first, then with more ease as the silence in the room wrapped around her not as something heavy, but as something safe. Nate sat nearby, not intruding, letting her breathe. He'd taken up the chair again, one elbow on the armrest, his fingers idly tracing patterns on the wood as if that helped him think. You live here? She asked at last, voice low. He nodded. Most of the time. My family's had this place for a long while. I try to keep it going. She glanced around the sunlit room, the worn but well-made furniture, the bookshelves crowded with volumes that looked read and reread, the framed sketches of trees and fields that lined the walls. Everything felt lived in, real. It's beautiful, she said, almost in spite of herself. Nate's mouth quirked in a small, surprised smile. Thank you. It's quiet. That's what I like about it. Buddy, ever the peacemaker, edged closer until he was half in her lap, his soft golden head resting across her legs. Gina laughed, an unguarded sound that startled even her. I think he likes you, Nate said, watching them. I don't get it, Gina said, still petting Buddy's silky ears. You don't even know me. Why bring me here? Why take the risk? Nate studied her a moment, then shrugged lightly. You looked like you needed a break from the world. I could offer that, at least for a little while. His honesty disarmed her more than any charm could have. She looked down, tracing the rim of her cup with one finger. I don't usually fall asleep on strangers, she said, half embarrassed, half teasing. I don't usually offer rides to strangers, Nate returned gently. So I guess we're even. A comfortable quiet settled between them. Outside, the morning brightened, birds flitted between bare branches, the frost beginning to melt in patches of sunlight. Kingsport, she said after a while, remembering. I should get to Kingsport. Nate nodded, but didn't move to stand. Instead, he asked softly, what's in Kingsport? Gina hesitated. Part of her wanted to brush it off. But something in his gaze, steady, kind, patient, made her answer honestly. I work weekends at a book warehouse. Sorting, packing, sometimes helping customers in the used section. It's not much, but it helps cover rent. And I like the books. Nate's smile deepened, as if some puzzle piece had just slid into place. I can see that, he said, nodding toward the worn poetry book sticking out of her bag. She followed his glance and blushed faintly. It's silly, I know. Lugging it around everywhere. It's not silly at all. His voice held no mockery, only sincerity. Books are good company. She relaxed fractionally, the last of her defensive edges softening under his quiet regard. And you, she ventured. What do you do? Besides rescuing stray passengers? He chuckled, rubbing a hand across the back of his neck. I own a publishing company. Small shops, mostly. We print books. Sell them. Her eyebrows lifted. You're in books? I am. That sparked something like a genuine smile from her, the first since she'd opened her eyes in his home. Well, she said, I guess this is the strangest job interview I've ever had. They both laughed at that, the sound easy and real. Buddy thumped his tail approvingly, as if the moment had passed some invisible test. The day stretched on softly. Nate offered to show her the gardens, quiet now in winter's grip, but with promises of spring in the buds on the trees. Gina hesitated, but curiosity won out. They walked side by side along gravel paths, Buddy padding ahead, occasionally doubling back as if to check they were still following. The house behind them stood warm and solid, the orchard beyond edged in mist. Nate spoke of the land, of the books they printed, of his hope to restore some of the older buildings on the property. Gina listened, drawn in despite herself. When she spoke of her classes, her dreams of finishing school, of maybe one day writing something worth reading, he listened with that same quiet focus that made her feel, for once, like her words mattered. And though she kept reminding herself she'd only meant to pass through, that she didn't belong here, a small voice inside whispered that maybe, just maybe, she had stumbled onto something rare. As the sun dipped lower, painting the fields in gold and pink, they found themselves at a small rise overlooking the property. Nate paused there, hands in his pockets, gazing out over the land. "I don't bring many people here," he said quietly. Gina didn't answer at first. Then, softly, "I don't let many people help me." Their eyes met, and the silence between them spoke louder than words. Buddy settled at their feet, the perfect bridge between two hearts that, for the first time in a long time, felt a little less alone. The warmth of the afternoon lingered, but a chill began to creep in with the falling sun. Gina pulled her coat tighter as they made their way back toward the house, her steps slower now, as if reluctant to leave the calm she'd found in the quiet of Nate's world. Buddy bounded ahead, chasing shadows, his joyful energy a stark contrast to the growing weight in Gina's chest. Inside, the housekeeper had left a light supper out: fresh bread, soft cheese, sliced fruit. Nate urged her to eat, and though she protested at first, hunger won. They sat at the kitchen table, the golden light from the hanging lamp casting soft halos on the worn wood surface. It felt easy. Dangerous, but easy. When they finished, Nate offered to drive her to Kingsport. But she hesitated, glancing out at the dust-shrouded road, at Buddy asleep by the door, at the house that felt more like refuge than any place had in years. "Tomorrow's fine," she said finally, surprising even herself. "If it's not too much trouble." Nate only nodded, his gaze gentle, as if he understood more than she'd said. But that fragile peace couldn't hold forever. It shattered the next morning. Gina woke early, restless despite the comfort of the guest room where she'd been given shelter. The house was quiet, the world outside silvered with frost. She wandered into the sunroom, drawn to the shelves of books lining the walls. Her fingers traced the spines absently, until a stack of papers on the desk near the window caught her eye. She didn't mean to pry, but a headline at the top of the visible page stopped her cold. Nathaniel Brooks, the reclusive publishing tycoon who saved small-town bookstores and built an empire. Her breath hitched. She stared at the article, at the accompanying photo: Nate, smiling, shaking hands with some dignitary at a ribbon cutting. The same man who'd carried her off the train, who'd offered her tea, who'd walked the gardens beside her as if he were just another man with dirt under his nails. Gina backed away from the desk, heart pounding, the warmth of the house suddenly stifling. He'd lied. Or no, not lied. He'd just let her believe he was someone else. The floor creaked behind her. "Gina?" She turned to find him there, hair tousled from sleep, concern etched across his face. "You should have told me," she said, her voice shaking. Nate froze. His eyes flicked to the desk, to the paper that had betrayed his secret. "I wanted to," he said quietly. "I didn't know how. I didn't want to ruin it." "Ruin what?" Her voice rose, heard lacing every word. "The game? The fantasy where you play the kind stranger and I play, what? The grateful girl who falls for it?" "No," Nate said quickly, stepping forward, but she backed away. "It wasn't like that. I swear. I just wanted one day." One day where it wasn't about who I am or what I have. And what about me? Gina demanded. Did you think how it would feel for me? To wake up and realize I was part of some story I didn't even know I was in? Buddy whined softly from the doorway, sensing the tension. Nate's shoulders sagged. I didn't want this. I didn't plan this. I liked talking to you. I liked how you looked at me. Like I was just a man on a train. The raw honesty in his voice cut through her anger, but the sting of betrayal still burned. I need to go, she said, grabbing her bag, her hands trembling. I'll drive you, he offered, but she shook her head. No. No more rides. No more kindnesses I don't understand. She left before he could stop her, striding down the path toward the road. The cold bit at her cheeks, tears she refused to shed pricking at the corners of her eyes. Nate stood on the porch, watching her go, his heart heavy. Buddy whimpered at his side, as if asking why he wasn't doing anything, to stop her. And Nate wanted to. God, he wanted to. But she deserved the choice. So he let her go. The sun rose higher, gilding the frost on the fields, but to Nate, the world felt grayer than it had in years. The bus stop at the edge of Wyndham was little more than a bench and a faded sign. Gina sat there, her bag at her feet, the cold seeping through her thin coat as the minutes dragged on. The road stretched quiet and empty in both directions. She kept telling herself she'd done the right thing, that leaving was smart, safe. But her chest ached in that way it did when you'd run from something good before it had a chance to bloom. The bus was late. The wind tugged at her hair, and she hugged herself tighter, willing away the sting of regret. She didn't hear the truck at first, the crunch of tires on gravel too soft beneath the whistle of the breeze. But Buddy's bark snapped her out of her thoughts. She looked up to see the golden lab bounding toward her, tail wagging, ears flapping. Walter followed at a slower pace, his cane tapping the ground, his kind eyes crinkled in a smile. I told him you'd be here, Walter said as Buddy reached Gina, leaning against her legs with a happy sigh. Gina knelt, burying her fingers in the dog's soft fur, tears pricking her eyes despite herself. I didn't expect to see him again. Walter sat slowly on the bench beside her. Buddy's got a nose for good souls. He doesn't let go easy. They sat in companionable silence for a long moment, the dog's warm weight grounding her, the quiet filling the spaces where her thoughts swirled. He's been looking for you, you know, Walter said softly. Nate. Not as the man with the headlines. As the man who missed the sound of your voice. Gina closed her eyes. The ache deepened. But this time it felt like longing, not fear. I don't belong in his world, she whispered. Walter chuckled, low and warm. Maybe he doesn't belong in it either. Maybe that's why he noticed you in the first place. A breeze stirred the frost on the grass, and in the distance, she heard the low rumble of a truck engine again. Nate's truck. He parked a little ways off and approached slowly, as if afraid of scaring her off. No grand speeches. No entourage. Just Nate in his worn boots and coat, the same man she'd first leaned on without knowing his name. I didn't come to take you back, he said when he was close enough for her to hear. I came because I couldn't let it end like that. I needed you to know it wasn't a game. It was never a game. Gina rose slowly, Buddy still at her side. I'm not good at this, she admitted, voice low. I don't know how to be part of whatever this is. Nate smiled, small and a little broken. Neither do I. But maybe we could figure it out. Together. She looked at him, then really looked, and saw not the CEO, not the tycoon from the article, but the man who'd carried her off a train because it felt like the right thing to do. I'm not ready for fairy tales, she said. Good, Nate replied. I'm not offering one. Just breakfast. A walk with Buddy. Maybe a book or two. A tear slipped down her cheek, but she was smiling. I could try that. He held out a hand, not pushing, just waiting. She took it. And together, they walked back toward the truck, Buddy dancing circles around them, the winter morning brighter somehow, as if the world had been holding its breath and finally let it go. They didn't need headlines. They didn't need fairy tales. Just a girl, a man, a dog, and a shared promise to try.